Good afternoon to you all. Here we're back in Delphi Economic Forum. My name is Angelos Athanasopoulos. I'm the Chief Editor in Politics and International Affairs in newspaper of VIMA in Athens. I have the honor to hold a conversation with a person whom I think knows more than any of us on what is possibly happening today in Ukraine on military terms. General David Petraeus. Today he's the chairman in KKR Global Institute. Good afternoon from Delphi, General. It's an honor and a privilege to have this discussion with you. You are the chairman of KKR, but I would like to tap in your vast experience through your experience in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and I would like to discuss a little bit with you and for you to offer your insights on what we are seeing today in Ukraine, which is the major issue all over the world. And I guess that you may be expecting my first question, and I would like to ask you, do you think that Russia has actually failed in its original military goals as it started?
I do, actually, and it's great to be with you, Angelos. Thank you. The privilege is mine. Yeah, Russia failed to achieve its main objective, which was to take Kyiv, topple the government, and replace President Zelensky with a pro-Russian president. They did not achieve that, and they devoted enormous forces to doing that. And it's enormous tribute to the Ukrainian forces for having stopped the Russians, then begun to counterattack against them, and ultimately forcing the Russians to withdraw completely from Kyiv, and then also from another major city in the north, Chernihiv, and a city in the northeast, Sumy. So essentially, Ukraine can accurately say, fairly say, that Ukraine won the battles of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy. That's not to say that the war is over by any means, and I'm sure we'll talk about where this is headed now, but those are major accomplishments by Ukraine, and certainly not what Russia expected. That Russia clearly underestimated enormously the capabilities of Ukrainian forces and overestimated enormously the capabilities of Russian forces, which, as you know, have shown themselves to be really quite deficient at virtually everything they have done, with the exception of destruction of an awful lot of Ukrainian military and civilian infrastructure. And often quite indiscriminately. And then also, of course, they have shown tragically, sadly, horrifically, the capacity for what clearly constitute war crimes. I don't think there's any nor disputing that at this point in time. And I fear that we're going to see much more evidence of similar war crimes in the other cities where Russia has operated, or the outskirts, the villages, as they withdraw from those locations as well. And all of this obviously has been very, very clearly documented, and I think proven also quite clearly.
Mm-hmm. We all, I think, have the sense that the Russians try to regroup and enter in a new phase of war. What do you think will be their next aim? Maybe conquering the whole of Donbass, reaching up to Odessa? What is your crystal ball saying?
Well, what they are doing certainly is withdrawing the forces, again, that were Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy, again, in the north. And what they have done then is to posture them so that they can be reconstituted. Essentially, these forces, many of them, somewhere around 20 of their battalions, have been rendered combat ineffective. That means, by the military doctrinal definition, that they cannot accomplish their mission without being plussed back up, without having replacements for the soldiers that they have lost. And keep in mind, their losses have been extraordinary, really catastrophic. A conservative estimate is that they have lost at least 15,000 soldiers killed in action. That's more than they lost in 9 or 10 years in Afghanistan. It's approaching, it's certainly over 4 times what we lost in 20 years of tough fighting in Iraq. And we had some tough times there, including the months when I was the commander of the surge in Iraq, the first 6 months. We took what we thought were very difficult casualties, but they were not remotely on the same scale of what Russia has suffered. So they've got to find replacements for their soldiers that have been killed and also seriously wounded, and another probably 30,000 or so. And also then replacements for the over 1,000 armored vehicles and others that they have lost as well. They then want to move those forces east in Belarus and then south along the Ukrainian border, and to insert them in eastern Ukraine, where the main effort of Russia now is. And they, of course, have said this themselves. Their public official announcement was that they, quote, have accomplished all of their phase one objectives, which, of course, again, is nonsense because they did not achieve their most important objective in Kyiv. But now what they're doing is focusing, as you noted, on trying to take control of the rest of the two oblasts or provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk in the southeast. You'll recall, of course, that Russian-supported separatists controlled maybe about a third or a quarter of those oblasts before. They're pushing out now from the southeast. They're also pushing into Ukraine from the east, trying to envelop some of the Ukrainian forces that are defending the areas of the Donbass that are still controlled by Ukraine. And then they'll start pushing up from Mariupol as soon as they can finally completely control that city, because there still is significant resistance from several locations inside Mariupol, although they are all over. The Russians are certainly, they've bisected the city several different ways, but by no means quelled all of the remaining resistance there. The defenders of Mariupol have been extraordinary, literally fighting to the last defender. But once that port city, that important port city on the Sea of Azov is taken, then those Russian units can turn north and also try to help to envelop some of those Ukrainian forces, again, that are defending the push from the Donbass. I should also note that Mariupol will also provide Russia a port that can very significantly help with their logistics. And of course, one of the many areas of deficiencies for the Russian forces has been the area of logistics. They're generally tied to rail systems. They're quite good if they have the rail system nearby. But once they have to cut loose of the rail systems, as they had to get into Ukraine, they don't have anywhere near the structure in their formations or military formations that U.S. and NATO forces typically have. They probably have 1/5 to 1/4 of what we have, and they've also shown a lack of capability when it comes to movement control on top of that. So they've really struggled to provide their soldiers what we would insist on ensuring that they have. And that's also a factor in the low morale that's been documented by those who have recorded radio calls and intercepted other messages from Russian forces to their higher headquarters and then also to their families back home.
I would like to ask you, you mentioned the success of the Ukrainian resistance. What was the key aspect? I read somewhere that the Ukrainians waged a mobile way of war, and this was something that the Russians were actually not prepared for. Is it true? What's the critical aspect here?
Well, there are many critical aspects, really. In fact, the very first is just the sheer determination of the Ukrainian forces. Keep in mind, of course, they're fighting for their survival. They have a president who has galvanized the entire country. Every male Ukrainian adult is expected to help this cause, and so are many, many others. Everybody is doing what he or she can to assist the military. The military has built its capabilities very impressively since the 2014 occupation of Crimea and also the breakout of conflict in the Donbass. A lot of soldiers have rotated through the front lines in the Donbass. I went there, by the way, about 3 years ago, is pre-COVID, obviously. And I came away from it feeling that, you know what, these soldiers are increasingly well-equipped, well-trained, and have unbelievable heart. I mean, you can't, again, that you either have that or you don't, and they have that. And this is this factor, this sheer determination. they also have a lot of other qualities they've demonstrated on the battlefield that the Russians just don't have. Initiative at the lower levels, at small unit level, young officers, and so forth. They have demonstrated real resourcefulness and creativity. It's well known now that they have a special operations unit that was on four-wheel all-terrain vehicles that was attacking that 40-mile convoy, the traffic jam, essentially, north of Kyiv, coming in from Belarus, just picking off first the fuel vehicles and then other select vehicles to cause the greatest amount of damage to that particular convoy. They have used the over 17,000 Javelin U.S. Guided missile anti-tank systems that are a fire and forget system, accurate to at least 2,500 meters. And they attack from the top if you choose to do that, which is a vulnerable area of tanks. And they have taken out, again, hundreds and hundreds of tanks with Javelins alone, the UK system as well, and then other systems that they already had. And then they've taken out a lot of fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft with the Stingers that have been provided, which are accurate up to about 10,000 feet, and then their own S-300 air defense system, which has also been augmented by some NATO nations in Eastern Europe that have those systems. So they've made very, very good use of what they have. They also have the advantage, in a sense, that they're fighting, it's the home field advantage. They're fighting in their own home soil. They know every village and every road, every building in some of these different areas. And again, everybody is engaged in this. So you have civilians who are helping to scan for the frequencies that the Russians are using. Their Russian secure communications failed. They had to go to single channel open communications. Citizens can find it and they can record it. We all hear it later. And then they can also jam it. And they've done a great deal of that. This is why the Russian generals are being killed. Their communication systems have broken down. They've even resorted to cell phones. The Ukrainians blocked the prefix for Russia on cell phones. So then the Russians started stealing civilian cell phones, but none of it has worked. And their generals have had to ride to the front, as have their battalion and regimental and brigade commanders. And they're getting picked off by highly skilled and very well equipped Ukrainian snipers. So again, I think the world considerably underestimated what Ukraine was going to be capable of doing. Those of us who have seen them in more recent years, I think were more likely to assess that they had real capability. And then beyond that as well, just keep in mind that Kyiv is larger in landmass than the size of New York City. New York City is about 300 square miles. Kyiv is 320. It's a very sprawling, of course, metropolitan area. And urban fighting, and I've had a lot of experience of that in Iraq and in Afghanistan with large areas. Again, 500,000 people and more. These consume soldiers. Every single, not just block, but every building, every room has to be cleared. And you have to leave soldiers behind or the enemy will backfill behind you and hit you from the rear. And they just never had, the Russians have never had the number of forces that were required for the tasks that they had. And then they obviously tried to attack along about 6 or 7 different axes of advance, which again is just not concentrating adequately the way they needed to. Now they are doing that. Now they are concentrating on the Donbass and on the southeast. It appears that they've given up getting also to the major Ukrainian port of Odessa in the southwest. They've been halted at a city called Mykolaiv, where there's great governor and military leadership. And in fact, they're counterattacking to the east from Mykolaiv, which again is about halfway from Crimea to Odessa. Mm-hmm. So once again, the Ukrainians have just done just about everything really, really well. But now they're going to be tested in another area about which there are concerns and some doubts, and that is their ability to move large forces from the north, from Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, and so forth, south about 450 miles at least at the shortest distance, could be 500 from Chernihiv, down to the Donbass and also to eastern Ukraine and then the southeastern area north of Mariupol to make sure those forces can't push up out of there. That means they have to have expeditionary logistics. That's much more challenging than operating from fixed bases or even operating from home, as some of the forces in Kyiv were doing. And this is going to cause, there will be issues here, I'm sure. There would be for the best of forces. Again, that's a vast distance. Having done, I was a division commander, 20,000 troops, 254 helicopters during the invasion of Iraq. And it helps, candidly, to have invaded a country if you're going to judge how someone else is doing it. So I speak with perhaps a little bit of authority in assessing how the Russians have done. Now what we need to do is see how the Ukrainians will do in this very substantial move. And needless to say, we need to be doing everything possible to provide assistance to them. And of course, the U.S. just keeps announcing hundreds and hundreds more millions of dollars of weapon systems, military equipment, ammunition, supplies, and so forth, as do many NATO nations.
Is there any critical component that maybe the Ukrainians will do in order to manage to transfer these massive forces from Kyiv towards the east, aside from weapons possibly? What else?
Well, again, this is going to stress their transport capabilities. And frankly, what they're going to have to do is press every vehicle conceivable into this. They don't have enough trucks, so they'll use buses. They'll use the rail system where it is still functioning and where they can use that. Again, that's a very, very valuable capability. And keep in mind that the Russians were never even able to shut off rail between Kyiv and the western part of the country. And keep in mind, of course, it's through the west that all of these resupplies are coming. Many of them, if not most, are coming, of course, through Poland. There are some other ways in as well. And it's been very good to see, for example, Slovakia reportedly transfer their S-300 air defense system to Ukraine. Keep in mind that what Ukraine needs in a number of cases is not necessarily what the U.S. or the pre-Cold War NATO members have. It's generally what is in Eastern Europe. And this is the Eastern Bloc systems, such as the S-300 air defense system, which Ukraine has used so effectively and Russia still has not knocked out. It's Eastern Bloc aircraft. It is Eastern Bloc tanks, T-72s, and so forth. And some of those are being transferred from the Czech Republic, according to reports. It is the multiple launch rocket system and the 152 millimeter heavy artillery. Again, as you well know, because you have our systems, I believe, or the Western systems, we use 155 millimeter howitzers and ammunition. So in many respects, these are not capabilities the U.S. and others can provide, although we are providing lots of capabilities, as I noted, including the Javelins and Stingers most prominently, but many, many others. But what we're also now providing is something called a switchblade drone, which is a loitering munition is the way to think of it. It pops up out of a tube, the blade's open, hence the term switchblade. It then goes up. The light version can circle for 15 minutes, some miles, and then the heavy version can go farther and orbit for 30 minutes. An operator has the picture and can pick a target for that loitering munition, and it locks onto the target, fire and forget as well. And when it then hits that target, tracks it, and takes it out. It's silent because it's electric powered. So it's a very, very literally a silent but deadly system. The question is whether we can get enough of these into Ukraine quickly enough to make a real difference, because this could help enormously with counterattacks, as you might imagine, if you can just pop up a lot of these, take out the front line, push farther, pop up more, and so forth. I'm not sure, because a lot of these, the heavy version in particular, was only produced in recent years. We don't have huge numbers in our own arsenal. So this will be a bit of a race to see how quickly they can be produced and then flown over there on our wide-body transport jets.
Switching to a more political question, I assume you agree with me that no matter how this war ends, the European security architecture, as we know it, has totally changed. And I wonder if you believe we should move back to a containment strategy with new characteristics, and what role NATO can play in this.
Well, NATO will be the organization that is going to perform this mission. I've often noted, actually, even before this invasion, that the greatest gift to NATO since the end of the Cold War is Vladimir Putin. Now he has completely revitalized the alliance. He has given cause for revolution, really. If you think about what Germany did in the weekend after the invasion, they committed to spend immediately 2% of GDP on defense, something they had not even reached 1.5% of before. They committed $110 billion in one-time expenses, which is almost double their defense budget, to improve their operational readiness. And they agreed to provide lethal assistance to another country for the first time in the post-World War II era. Again, that is exemplary of what's happening really throughout the alliance, although more dramatic perhaps than any other country. But you're seeing the shift already. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who happily is going to stay on for an additional year as the Secretary General, hugely effective, universally admired, has announced that we're doubling the forces that are in the Baltic states. We are pushing many more forces to eastern Poland. We already had a U.S. brigade there rotating through, and now you'll see additional forces there. And then you're going to see, I'm sure, additional forces in the other Eastern European countries that border Ukraine or Moldova, of course, being Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary. So what you're seeing is the entire posture of the alliance shift much further east from where it was, of course, in the Cold War era, though there had already been a lot of work done to push forces from essentially Western Europe to the east in a crisis. But now they're just going to be deployed out there, I think, full time. A lot of this will depend on what the threat perception is of Russia when this is all brought to a conclusion. But certainly, I think, as long as Vladimir Putin is the president of Russia, there is going to be enormous concern and wariness about what it is that he might have his forces do. And I think very, very prudent to take the steps that are being taken. So for the United States in particular, a country that was transitioning to a focus on the Indo-Pacific, as it's termed, the rebalance to Asia, as it was described back in the Obama administration and then carried through the Trump administration and into the Biden administration. This means that there will be greater defense spending because we're going to have to do more in Eastern Europe than had been the plans, even while keeping lots of other plate spinning, if you will, to counter Iran, North Korea, and a variety of Islamist extremist organizations that are still around the world and pose a threat. All of these, of course, we uniquely keep all these plates spinning with lots of coordination and help from our NATO and other partners and allies around the world. So this will be a change, and it's going to be a significant one. And I expect that NATO will be the organization that is the focus for this and is the integrator and the overseer of all of it. And certainly North America will play a significant role in this.
You just laid the groundwork for my last question, which is, I wonder how concerned are you for the fact that some scholars have highlighted that maybe Russia and China can somehow align and then create a Eurasian landmass which could be more difficult to contain. Would you agree with this assessment?
Not necessarily. I think that you're already seeing concerns. Again, it's perceptible, but not hugely perceptible given the system. But there are already concerns in Beijing that this partnership without limits, as it was described on the eve of the Olympics when President Xi and President Putin met, that tying China to an individual who has become an international pariah and is leading what clearly is the evil empire in the world today and now implicated in enormous war crimes as well, that there are concerns that has a price to go with it. And the idea that, again, this is a huge benefit, I think is something that certainly can be called into question. So, again, I would be very careful. I think it would be premature to assess that is something that is going to evolve. certainly it is among the scenarios about which NATO and other countries around the world need to be concerned, but there are plenty of others as well.
General, thank you so much for being with us virtually. I hope next year physically. And now we will get prepared for our next panel with two distinguished speakers, Dr. Rosa Balfour, Director in Carnegie Europe, and Mr. Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister and former Foreign Minister of Sweden. Thank you very much.